With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another episode of Single Muslim Live, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com and broadcasted exclusively on Wakefield-based British Muslim TV. You are currently watching us from Sky Channel 752, as well as live streamed across all our social media platforms, including Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. From wherever you're watching, a very warm welcome. Now remember, as always, you can also be a part of tonight's discussion by sending in your questions or comments either through our live stream channels or by calling in live to the studio on 0192 4231 with your questions and for my guest. Just remember, calls standard rates do apply, so please make sure you have your bill payer's permission. Alternatively, you can also WhatsApp us in confidence by WhatsApping our number on 07950797017, and you can request to be anonymous if you wish to do so. I'm looking forward to having this wide discussion with all our audience, and a very warm welcome again to everyone who is watching us from all over the globe. Today we will be discussing the challenges facing reverts, so reverts to Islam, in finding a partner, in searching for those life partner, and in marriages, etc. I have a special guest with me today who is Catherine Jones. Now I'll just give you a brief introduction before I introduce Catherine. Catherine Jones is the founder of Back to the Fitra Academy, which is a mentoring academy that is designed for Muslims, but she has a very special branch within that academy, and that is for reverts and supporting reverts. So we will get first-hand experience from Catherine Jones, as well as her insight and perspective on the challenges that we as a community and reverts are tackling. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my guest, Catherine Jones. Welcome, Catherine. How are you today?
Thank you for having me here. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very excited to get going with this topic. It's very important, very prevalent, but unfortunately not spoken about often. Now, before we begin, I want to introduce the audience, those that are maybe perhaps based outside the UK as well. We actually have a registered UK charity for sisters that might not be aware of either, called Solace, and they are dedicated to revert Muslim sisters that do face challenges in their journey. And they've also highlighted their own issues that they've seen is prevalent amongst these sisters. So I will go through with them, and I definitely need your perspective, take and advice, Catherine, as you do work firsthand with revert Muslim sisters. And one of the points was that they found reverts feel extremely lonely on their search for a husband. What is your take on that, and what is your best advice to those sisters?
Oh, yes, well, certainly I understand that. I've seen that many, many times. It's a lonely journey because it really feels like everyone wants to just set you up with their relative without much great concern for whether it's a good match or not. It seems to be that there isn't a great deal of thought put around what is a convert sister going to need in a marriage. And will that person really be compatible? There seems to be more of a, well, it would be great to get a visa, or it would be great to have this person in our family, but not much thought about the sister. And so I think a lot of them feel a lot bombarded by insincere proposals rather than sincere proposals. So I think we have two extremes. We have those that are struggling to find a match, and those that are bombarded with those sorts of proposals but don't find anybody that's really a good match for them. Because culturally, if someone hasn't grown up in the West, culturally, there's a lot of differences. We're used to our freedom. We're used to financial freedom. We're used to being able to make our own decisions. And so you need someone who's going to be able to be accommodating to that understanding and not expect to bring into the household their culture from their home and expect that this sister is going to actually be able to live that. And we sometimes do end up like that, because I ended up in that sort of marriage myself. We lose ourselves because it's like we're encouraged to forsake our culture to become a part of someone else's culture that we don't even know. We may not have even been to that country before, and we're now expected to cook like their moms and behave like mums and sisters, and we have no clue how that even looks, and then we're in trouble for not managing that. So there has to be a lot of consideration, and so that makes it very challenging for a convert sister to actually find somebody. So I guess some of my advice is, number one, I think it's really important for convert sisters particularly to know their rights and understand what marriage in Islam is meant to be like, not what it seems to be like out there, but what it's meant to be like. So we know what we're looking for and know what the standards are that we should be expecting to be met. That we're patient to wait for the right one, that we don't fall into the trap that is often told to us that, oh, you won't be able to be a good Muslim unless you're married. You know, you need to fulfill half your deen and be married. That was the pressure I was put under. That was 25 years ago now. I'm not sure if that pressure is still relevant now, but that was what was, wasn't really at all interested in being married, but I was pushed down that road of, well, to be a good Muslim in the West, you need to be married, so you've got a husband to help you in that way. So those sorts of pressures, don't fall into that. You know, wait until you're ready. Learn about the istikhara prayer. Like, I didn't even know about that until years into my marriage, that there was even such a thing as the istikhara prayer. So you're putting it in Allah's hands that if this marriage is good for you, then facilitate it for you. If it's not, then take it away from you and make you pleased with that. So I really love the istikhara prayer, because I may not be the best judge, but Allah knows. So I'm handing it over to Allah. And I also think that another challenge we have is the whole wali situation. If we have a wali, it's often a token wali. It's not somebody who is related to us or cares about us, who's going to really decide if the brother is right for us. So even down to who's going to be that person or that male in the Muslim world that's going to be able to dig for you to really find out if this brother is who he says he is and is not putting on some sort of display on your behalf.
Some sort of front,
that is so important, because I didn't have that. And the person, I didn't even know who the person was who was delegated as my wali on the day. And each person who did my initial marriage, I came to find out later, already knew that the person I married back then was using marijuana, and even before I was a Muslim, you know, had a very strong stand against drug use. So that sort of information would have been really important to me, but people don't tell you that. So I think don't be in a rush is a really important lesson.
Yes.
It's a
Thank
lifetime.
you for sharing. Sorry to cut you off, Catherine. We've actually got a question for you, and you raised some really good points that I do want to return to, especially when you mentioned sincere versus insincere proposals, because this is something that Solace has raised and reverts have raised as an issue. Thank you as well for sharing your personal journey. And you did mention culture, and someone actually sent a question for you, and that is, why is there a stigma to getting married to a revert within the Pakistani culture? How would you answer that question for this brother? And if you can also advise how we can, as a community, overcome these barriers.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because I haven't ever married into the Pakistani community, so I'm not really entirely sure why there is that idea. I guess I have some thoughts around that. I'm not even sure why, but the feeling I get is that it's sort of seen that we are coming in with a clean slate, that maybe we can be manipulated, or that we're malleable. So because we're so new, maybe we can be malleable to be how they want us to be, or maybe we won't give a hard time like maybe they're used to from their own culture, because they know each other. I don't really 100% know. From my personal experience and the sisters I've spoken to, um, unfortunately, many of us have married into abusive marriages, and I believe from that perspective, and this is not about Pakistanis, by the way, now, because I'm not actually connecting this to the initial question. It the What I believe is that because we have little knowledge, it's very easy for them to come across as the expert and guide us to living the way they decide Islam should be lived, which works temporarily until we gain knowledge. And then, of course, we see the falsehood in what we've been led to. And so we often kick back at that point, which is why a lot of these marriages end up in divorce. So it's not good to start that way in the first place. And the thing is, just because we don't have knowledge doesn't mean that we're going to stay, practicing Islam the way the culture that we've been adopted into is. We tend to, if we've genuinely embraced Islam, have a passion for knowing the truth and seeking it out, and it will all backfire in the end, and become a problem. So it's not a good direction to go anyway. But as far as why is it a thing in Pakistani culture, I have no idea. I don't.
Well, I'm
About
someone
that.
that does come from an Arab culture, and what I can give on that take about the stigma is it all goes back to cultural barriers, especially if there's a language barrier and different cultural standards. And some reverts do feel this pressure, and I've had revert sisters say, I feel like the mum-in-law favors the other daughter-in-laws because they're from the same culture and they can talk in the same language and they share the same food. So from a perspective of someone that does come from South Asian culture, I do believe it is cultural barriers, and the only way I think we can overcome it from a personal perspective is through education, and just really having that conversation with parents. And there is a lot we can connect with beyond language and food, but cultural barriers is a whole different topic for another day. I'm glad you mentioned abuse, Catherine, because actually what has been pointed out as well, that many revert sisters fall prey to predatory behavior from some Muslim men. This is something that Solace has shared amongst women that do go and seek for help and advice. How do sisters deal with that? How do we even reach that point where they do fall prey?
I think the first issue is that when we first discover Islam, of course, we're looking at it as this beautiful religion that we're embracing. And there is this misconception that we have that all Muslims know about their religion and are practicing their religion. So we have this false expectation that they're they know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about. And I know from my own personal experience, because I was also working and studying in a male-dominated field, it was quite natural for me to have male friendships. And so when a Muslim male, was being friendly, it didn't appear to be anything to be concerned about, because in my culture, that isn't something that's concerning. But when you understand Islam, then that becomes something that becomes a question mark. Well, if this person is quite happy to invite you over to their house on their own for a private meeting, in Western culture, that's actually okay, but in Islamic culture, it's not. And so I think that lack of knowledge leads us to innocently falling into the trap, because we don't see it as a red flag, when in fact now, with the knowledge I have, I would see it as a big red flag.
Lovely. And as you were speaking, Catherine, we actually got comments on Facebook, and that was Fatima saying, great show, and also another sister saying this is really brilliant. So thank you so much. It is actually a great pleasure. And keep your comments coming, everyone, and feel free to send any questions to Catherine. And as you can see, she has so bravely shared her own personal experience, and we'd love to hear your voice. So feel free to also call into studio. The numbers are provided on the screen. Now, Catherine, so the topic of abuse, of course, it is taboo and underrepresented, especially when we do intersect, different journeys of Muslim sisters, and in particular, we are talking about revert sisters. And this is an issue that has been raised, sometimes not even before the process of marriage, but within. And it's found that revert sisters find themselves years later in an unhappy and sometimes abusive marriage with nowhere and no one to turn to. What is your advice to those sisters? And also, if you can give us some insight on that as well, would be really helpful for the community, just to increase our awareness of these issues.
I think, well, just from my personal experience, I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but from my personal experience, I think one of the key ways in which we find ourselves in that situation is through what I would label as spiritual abuse or religious abuse, where Islam is used as a tool to keep us entrapped in that marriage, and always being criticized for not being good enough in terms of our Islamic practice. And because we've embraced Islam, there's a genuinity to our Islam. And so that cuts to our heart. And so we're always trying so hard and believing that somehow it must be a deficiency in ourselves and our practice that is creating the problem, and takes a long time to actually come to understand that actually, no, that's not a deficiency in us. It's actually an abusive partner. But that was my situation was hadiths like, if you get divorced, it rocks the throne of Allah, and things like that are often used at us. Or if you don't come to the bed when you're told, the angels will curse you all night. And we just kept getting reminded and reminded of all these things over and over again to keep us and feeling like, well, we want to please Allah. I mean, I've really, now that I understand Islam, and that was the other abuse I had, was I had all of my means of learning Islam taken away from me, because back then in 1995 we didn't have the internet like this. We didn't have accessibility to knowledge like this. So I would order books online, and then I would be told, oh no, don't read this book because it's full of weak hadiths. If you read this book, it's going to weaken your deen. And so I wouldn't read it because I was worried I would weaken my deen, only to discover after I'd left that marriage and started learning from good scholars that they were exactly the books they were teaching from. So we don't know, if we don't have people around us who are knowledgeable, who understand, who can show us the way, we are incredibly vulnerable because we don't know enough to know what's right and wrong. I knew intuitively in my heart the whole time that this can't be right. Because when I embraced Islam, I knew in my heart it was the right way to be. But what I was living just didn't feel right. But I had access to no one who could tell me any differently. And it wasn't until many years later, and we're talking like 7 to 8 years into being a Muslim and being married without any Muslim friends at that stage, that I was finally allowed to go to a class at the mosque. And I met a sister there, and she started telling me things and showing me things that got me questioning. So I guess what I would say is it's really important before you get married to develop your support structure of good, sincere sisters and your knowledge. But if you find yourself in that predicament, it's too late now to do it before marriage, is find those good sisters who do know their deen, who are going to tell you the truth, so you can start your journey to the correct way, to see whether this is really the marriage for you or not. And there is no, like, there's a lot of stigma in our ummah about divorce, and the
Indeed.
fact always put on women, if there's a divorce. But honestly, given my experience, the damage it does to yourself, the damage it does to your children, you have to seek help and find a way to, whether it's through divorce or whether it's through getting your husband to get help. I mean, I hope there are husbands out there that do that. Haven't
Or
come
willing to
across
get
too many
help.
of them. If there are some listening here, please go and get help and save your family rather than it end up broken. But at the end of the day, you can't wait for them to change if you're being harmed and your children are being harmed, and that includes psychological, emotional harm. We seem to
Indeed.
only be able to address it when it becomes physical harm, but that's actually sometimes the least. The physical abuse I experienced affected me much less than the emotional and psychological abuse that I went through.
Well, Catherine, I'm so sorry to hear about your experiences, but thank you so much for being transparent and sharing them with the community and the audience. I'm sure we'll definitely benefit from them. And we'll go back and talk about psychological abuse later in the show. We've got a comment. Hi, this is a question for Maedeh Show today. I would like to ask, what makes a good Muslim husband for both a Muslim lady and for a revert? Thank you for the show, and I've been watching it on YouTube before. Today's the first time. Welcome. I'm able to watch it live. Thank you for sending in your question. I'll just repeat it to you, Catherine. It's, I would like to ask, what makes a good Muslim husband for both a Muslim lady and for a revert? Now, we might be here all day, but give us a perspective on what you think makes a good Muslim husband for both Muslim-born ladies and reverts.
Yeah, I'll make it fairly simple. I think that it boils down to two things: good character and good deen. If they are a good practicing Muslim and they have a good character, then you're definitely on the right path. If you can tick those two boxes first, then you can start looking at the finer details. But if there's a deal breaker in those two boxes, well, I wouldn't go any further, to be honest. When it comes to a convert, I think the additional things that help is somebody who is understanding that they're marrying someone from a different culture. And this is the same for intercultural marriages. It doesn't have to even be a convert. So that they're actually willing to compromise and come and create their own family culture. This is something we discussed in one of our convert support groups. And the families that seemed the most successful were the ones that came together and they created their own new culture in their family, which was a blend of the two cultures that came together. So there's a flexibility from both sides to let go of some things, and there's an acceptance from both sides to accept certain things, so that you build your own blended community in your family and you have your own family community, culture. And that's really helpful for the children, because then they actually get both cultures in their life and they have a single identity rather than this sometimes confused, complex identity that they grow up with parents from different cultures. So that was really beautiful to hear some of the success stories where families had done that. So asking that question when you're going through the marriage questions about the family culture is really important. And the other one is someone who has a very understanding attitude towards non-Muslims, because their in-laws most likely will all be non-Muslim. So if it's someone who thinks that the non-Muslims are all the infidels and has that kind of real strong attitude towards them, then they're probably not likely to be a good match for a convert, because they're probably not likely to get on well with the family, and most likely will put you in a position where, if it's a decision between something your family wants and something your husband wants, that you'll be put in that position of, well, they're non-Muslim, so they don't count, so you don't need to consider them, you have to just obey me. And you might get in that feeling like torn between the love of your family and the love of your husband. So they would be the points.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's a nail on the head that I haven't actually touched before, but indeed you do need to find out the family's beliefs. Catherine, we've got questions flooding in, and thank you to everyone that is sending their question. Keep sending them through. Now, Catherine, this is from Fatima. She's asking and stating, it's so sad that women feel safer with non-Muslim men than with Muslim men. What does this say about where our community is? How would you answer that question, Catherine?
Well, that's a huge question. So I'll just answer my perspective on it. And
Definitely.
It's coming from the work that I do. So I do work in emotional and spiritual resilience, like building the emotional and spiritual resilience in our ummah. And so I also connect with other people who are doing this work. And what we see is that women are very active in this role, but men are not. We're starting to see some men wanting to be more involved. But what I feel is an issue is some of the stigmas or stereotypes or whatever we've got going on in our ummah about whether that's where men should be, whether they should be looking at their emotions and feelings and all those sorts of things. Whereas I think we really need to be all on the same page. We need the men and the women in our ummah trying to improve their character, trying to master their emotions and be in a good connection with Allah. Because if we have both doing that, then we're going to have a strong community. But if we have just one part of the community, as in the women doing that work and leaving the men behind, there's going to be a lot of dysfunction. So I don't have
Indeed.
the answer. I don't have the answer to that. I would like to have. I make dua to Allah for the answer to that, because with my Back to the Future Academy, I would love to figure out a way of including the men in the work that we do, because I see it really needed. We need to work together.
We definitely do. I'm glad, yeah, we do need to work together. Thank you for sharing that perspective, Catherine. And thank you, Fatima, for sending in your question and your comment. It's viewers like you that make the show so special. The next question for you, Catherine, is this is more of a dilemma / question. I'm speaking to a woman who wants to convert before we get married. How do I tell my parents?
So I'm taking it this is a Muslim brother who's met a woman who wants to convert. How does he tell his parents? I'm not sure I'm the one that's
assuming there might be some discrimination from the parents' side of things, I'm assuming.
Sure.
So we can dissect it from different angles.
Yes, that's an interesting perspective, because obviously being probably the one that would be the other side of that picture, not that I converted to get married, it's like, oh, I have to step into the other person's shoes to answer that. I guess if I use my own experience of telling my parents, or not really telling my parents about becoming a Muslim, it's a similar sort of thing, because it's a similar sort of reaction, isn't it? That there's going to be some prejudice or some big thinking around it. My first advice is that it doesn't help keeping it a secret, that the longer you wait, actually, I think the messier it becomes. So it's better to introduce the topic early. And like, we have no control over other people's thinking or how other people are going to take it. So I would say, be honest, be sincere, be authentic. Don't try and hide it or sugarcoat it or anything like that. Just come with genuine sincerity, make lots of dua to Allah. And the outcome is going to be in Allah's hands in the end, not ours, because we can't predict how people are going to behave or manage things. They may turn out that, despite their prejudice, they think she's absolutely lovely and wonderful, and that might be what helps them pass their prejudices. You know, maybe Allah has sent this as a means for the family to change their views about things. We don't know any of that, but it's really in Allah's hands. So make dua, be sincere and authentic and compassionate. And if it does become messy, be patient and calm through it. Give time for the family to process, to have their reaction. Don't react back. And then readdress it once the storm has calmed, to see if you can move forward with it. But don't react to their reaction. Just try and be patient and calm, because if they're going to react, they're going to react. It's going to come from the way they're thinking about it, and it's not personal. It's just their thinking.
You heard, Catherine, it's not personal. Thank you for sending in your question. Remember, you can still join in the discussion tonight. We are discussing the challenges facing reverts. You can call into the studio on 0192 4231083. Standard rates do apply. Or like our viewers have been doing tonight, you can also send in comments and questions either throughout our social media, so Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, as we're live on there as well, or you can send it on WhatsApp and request to be anonymous on 07950797017. Catherine has already touched on so many important angles and dimensions when it does come with the challenges facing reverts, and I do want to go back into some of them. Now, Catherine, you raise a very interesting point, and this is something we are tackling as a community in so many different areas, and this is the world is tackling as well, is differentiating between Islam and Islamic teachings and the actions of individual Muslims. And often some reverts share that this confusion that they tackle, and that's differentiating and distinguishing, okay, what is faith and what is culture. I want you to tell us whether you personally did go through that confusion, or if you have any clients that do go through that confusion, and how we can navigate between that confusion of what is faith and what is culture. Because I've had revert sisters come to me and they're like, is this Islamic? Like, this has happened. And then I'm like, well, it's not. And then it just turns out it's more of a cultural thing. And so this confusion is very prevalent, and this is where I want to discuss next.
Awesome. So one piece of advice I got at the beginning when I first became a Muslim was, don't look at the Muslims, look at Islam. And that was actually what I did. And so that, I think, protected me to some degree. Although, because, as I shared before, I married into a very cultural and abusive environment, I wasn't really able to practice that until I came out of that marriage. So it was many years later. But then, even now, 25 years later, I'm currently studying Sharia with an amazing teacher. And what's coming out from that is how much culture has been adopted by the Muslims, and how much of what we were like before we were Muslims is still okay. And we had shed all these things, or disconnected ourselves from parts of ourselves that were quite okay, but because of the cultures we married into, we were led to believe it wasn't. And so it has been really beautiful to rediscover some of the things. For instance, anyone who follows me on Facebook could see that there's lots of pictures of me climbing Mount Lofty and doing walks and everything and being quite adventurous. That was how I was before I became a Muslim, but it was the cultures, the rhetoric I was getting that kind of led me to believe that, oh, that's not how Muslim women are, we're not that outgoing and adventurous. And I've come to realize that there's nothing in Islam that stops us being outgoing and adventurous. And so, I've embraced that again, and it's awesome, because that was a really big part of my life. I grew up in the great outdoors. That's what the Aussie lifestyle is the great outdoors. And I became really unhealthy and unfit and fat, actually, because I wasn't, out there walking and exercising and looking after myself and breathing fresh air. And there's so much spiritual connection you get through walking anyway, when you're amongst, in Allah's creation, breathing the fresh air, hearing the birds, the peace and quiet of not being bombarded by all that information. So I think the piece of advice I was given, look at Islam, not at the Muslims, is key. And I think when you're looking at Islam, remember that actually Islam is very simple. It's not complicated. That when it comes to life, everything is halal unless specifically there is evidence to say that it is haram. And when it comes to worship, the only things that are halal in worship is what we've got evidence to support that that's an act of worship. It's really simple. So if we learn our deen properly, it actually becomes, quite simple and easy to follow. And there's so much less restriction when we realize that. And so here's my trick. I'm going to tell you
Share with us your tricks.
When someone comes at you and tells you it's halal or haram and you must do this or you mustn't do that, or with all that sort of stuff, which happens all the time, I have this joke.
To everyone, indeed.
Yeah, I have this joke that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they were all converts and they were given 13 years to grow close to Allah before the halal and the haram was really revealed. We're given 13 seconds. Because that's what everyone seems to want to teach us first, is the halal and the haram, rather than nurture our relationship with Allah. But my trick is play dumb. So my teacher taught me that rule about evidence. And so when someone comes at me and goes, oh, well, you're meant to fast this day because of this, and I go, oh, really? I've never heard about that before. Can you show me the evidence? My teachers told me we need to have evidence from the Quran or from the Hadiths to support any act of worship. Can you show it to me? And they never can. And I already know that it isn't, but I just play dumb so that it is a non-threatening way of getting the message across that I'm not going to just take what you say blanketly like that. You have to show me that it's true.
Indeed. That is a very good insight, and I will be taking that trick on board with me, as should everyone else, because this is something that is always does exist in the community, and everyone individually has probably at some point in their life journey has experienced those confrontations. Again, thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your personal experiences. It's been an honor, and it's so refreshing and inspiring to hear your narrative, how you've redefined and your own narrative, how you've rediscovered Islam, and you've given us a very lovely and beautiful takeaway. And this is something we can repeat amongst ourselves and to others, that don't, and when you look at Islam, don't look at Muslims. And this is super, super important. I want to rewind a bit to earlier on when we were talking about abuse, and often we don't look at it in the entirety of it, and there's so many dimensions, angles, intersections. Of course, this is a topic that we will be discussing in episodes to come at different angles. Now, I want to go back to what Catherine said specifically. And Catherine, we were speaking about psychological. I want you just to tell us more about psychological abuse and how we can differentiate that, examples perhaps, if you feel comfortable, of course. And yeah, the floor is all yours.
I think the one I see coming up very commonly in our ummah is what we would call emotional blackmail. It's where it's very easy to define. It's where instead of just asking you in an authentic way, can you do this, or I want you to do this, or correct you in an authentic way, it's done through making you feel fearful, obliged, or guilty. I call it fog. Fear is the F, obliged is the O, and G is guilt. So basically it's amplifying the volume on the fear or the obligation or the guilt. So trying to get you to conform to the way they want you to be through either of those three emotions. And that is not okay. I would call it an emotional cancer. It starts off small, just like a cancer starts off with a few cells in your body, but then it grows until it completely destroys the relationship, and it destroys the person that's being emotionally blackmailed. Because when you feel like you can't say no to something that's unreasonable, it starts off, I'll just give a petty example. Say someone wants 5 cents, like, it's such a ridiculous thing. Of course, if someone wants 5 cents, you'd give them 5 cents, right? But it's asked for in a way that if you don't do it, you're a bad Muslim, or if you don't do it, you're not being a good wife, or if you don't do it, and so there's a implication if you don't do it. So when you do it, instead of it feeling like a positive transaction, you feel like you're giving your soul away in the process. And so every time, and so what happens is that starts off small, like 5 cents. Next thing, if we just use dollars as an example here to for the what I'm unpacking, you know, eventually it's like thousands of dollars, or like it works its way up. And so then now it's become unreasonable, but you can't say no because you've been caught up in this web of having to say yes. And that if you say no, you're bombarded with, oh, you're such a selfish person and all this kind of things. I got accused of being selfish. After the divorce, I sent some food home in one of my good saucepans to my stepsons because I was worried about them and what they were eating. And when I asked for my saucepan back, I got called a selfish woman for wanting my saucepan back. You know, it's that sort of thing. It's unreasonable. So what happens is psychologically and emotionally, the person that's being emotionally blackmailed eventually just dies inside. I was pretty much, I shut down completely emotionally by the end of that marriage. And physically, what happens is the body follows. So physically, I was at the point that my doctor said, who's going to take care of your kids if you die? Because I was struggling to breathe on maximum asthma medication and it wasn't working. And she was worried I was going to actually die and that was going to leave my kids without me. So it affects you physically too. It's been how many years? 17 years? It's been a long time. Yeah, it's been 17 years since I left that marriage. Only now, this year, am I getting my physical body back to health from what happened to. So it wasn't physical abuse, it was emotional abuse, but the physiological things that go on in the body in response to that deteriorate the body as well. So because you always got high cortisol levels, that destroys everything in the body. And so it's destructive even physiologically to be in that emotional abuse all the time. You just lose yourself, you lose your deen. I was only hanging on to a thread spiritually by the end, and that was that thread that got me out of there, that had me praying to Allah to get me out of there. And in the end, subhanallah, Allah got me out of there in the most peaceful way, if you could call it peaceful, compared to what you could expect. I was able to get out of there fairly effortlessly. You know, subhanallah. There was a lot of mess after that, but the actual leaving, Allah facilitated that with such ease. So, yeah, subhanallah. Emotional and psychological abuse is not really dressed very well in our ummah at all. And it needs to be, because it is destroying families. It is destroying children, because children who grow up in that grow up with a lot of insecurities. They often become abusers or victims themselves, or both. The interesting thing is you can be both, because that's all they understand. It's corrupted the fitra of those children. They were born pure, but being in that kind of abusive environment has corrupted them. So there's nothing good in it at all. And there's no necessity for it. It comes from insecurity and the need to control. So the person who is doing this needs help, because there's something that's insecure in them that requires them to control. The key thing here is we don't have control. Only Allah has control. So it's lacking tawakkul to be in this state as well. So it's affecting a person who's the abuser as well from a spiritual perspective, because they're not putting their trust in Allah. They're thinking they have to control everything. They have to make sure everybody is behaving the way they need them to behave, and they're using these psychological methods to make that happen. And so they need help too, because they're in a spiritual crisis themselves. So we need to help both sides, the victims and the oppressors, because everybody is suffering in that environment.
Well, we are honored that you have shared your personal experiences and circumstances with us. This is a subject we will be revisiting for sure. Here at British Muslim TV, we strive to serve the community, and we do our utmost to support you where possible. It's important for me to mention that if you are suffering from any emotional or physical distress, or being affected by today's program, you can reach out to the relevant organizations for confidential advice. Full details can be found on our website, and that's on BritishMuslim.tv/support. If you are in immediate danger, please always dial 999. That is the UK emergency line. And again, thank you, Catherine, for sharing your personal experiences. And we're sorry to hear what you went through. But again, like you said, these discussions do need to take place, and we're truly honoured to have you tonight to push for these discussions to be taking place. We're raising awareness on these issues and these discussions, and we hope that in the future we'll see more of this from the community, inside the community, and move forward, inshallah. Remember, you can also be a part of tonight's discussion that we are having, and it'd be lovely to hear your voices, so do feel free to call into studio if you would like. Remember, that's on 0192423183. Standard rates do apply. And you can also be a part of the discussion through social media, of course, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and also our WhatsApp with the number on the screen where you can WhatsApp us in confidence any comments you have or questions you have for myself or Catherine. And on that note, I actually have a question that's been sent through just now. Catherine, what tips do you have for people looking for a partner? That is the question.
Okay, so if you have the opportunity before you meet anyone, is think about what are the important things to you, like what are the deal breakers. So set up a list of what are the deal breakers in terms of who you would marry. So an idea of a deal breaker might be maybe you have a career. A deal breaker might be someone who wouldn't want their wife to work, right? So you have your list of deal breakers. And so if you're going through the Islamic process, you get your wali or whoever's coming to you with a possible match, to make sure that none of the deal breakers are there first before you even meet them, so that you don't get any kind of emotional attachment. Because if they're truly your values and your deal breakers, you don't want your emotional attachment to somebody to have you sacrifice that, if that makes sense. Because when we get emotionally attached, we start to go, oh, this doesn't matter so much anymore. That's okay. We can go without that one. And of course, it's not going to be successful because they were your deal breakers. So you have your deal breakers, and so you just don't ever get to step one if they don't tick all the boxes for that. But then also have your second level questions of, these are the things that are important to me. And for those things, it's about, if one of them's not met, reflecting on, can I live with that? Because we can't go into a marriage expecting someone to change for us. Like, hopefully when two people come together, there is compromise from both sides. But you can't enter into it with an expectation that something specific will change in a person. You have to go into it going, okay, I understand that this is the weakness of this person, and I'm happy to accept that. I think I can live with that. So you have your important things, and then of course everything else after that. One of the things that I have noticed in being kind of a chaperone for some of the young sisters in these meetings, because they didn't want to go to these meetings alone, was that they would come prepared, probably because I'd coached them first, with all their questions, and then they'd ask the brother and they'd go, do you have any questions for me? And he'd go, no, not really. And it's like, how are you going to know if you don't ask anything? And secondly, for the person that's gone into it with that, background thinking, they feel a bit disappointed and let down when the other person hasn't. And they also feel a little bit shortchanged, like, don't you want to know anything about me? Isn't that like, why would you want to marry me if you've never asked me any questions? So I think it's really important before you start going into any of those conversations to have a clear picture and even come with a list on a piece of paper or on your iPad or on your phone or whatever, and make sure you go through things. And then when you get to the point where you think, well, this might be right, don't forget the istikhara prayer. Like, do not forget to hand it over to Allah, because Allah knows best.
Indeed, I'm glad you mentioned istikhara, because like you said, this is something we often discover, some of us later, even myself. But thank you for your tips, Catherine. I'm sure that will benefit our viewer that asked that question. Thank you again for sending in that question. And guys, remember, ask yourselves, what are your deal breakers? Are you compromising them, etc.? Thank you indeed, Catherine. We've got a comment for you, actually. On one of our social media platforms, and that's, I hope Sister Catherine is doing much better now, inshallah, after everything she's been through in relationships and marriage. And my last question is, what is the best way to enjoy being single now in life?
So what we talk about in my academy is that we are responsible for our own happiness. So marriage, and I think another thing to remember as a single person is that marriage doesn't necessarily mean happiness, because a lot of people think that they won't be happy until they get married and discover they're still not happy. So I would say that focus on your deen, focus on what is your purpose in this life? What are you meant to be doing for the sake of Allah in this life? Because we all have strengths and weaknesses. So Allah has geared us all to be part of the puzzle, part of the solution. So what is your part in that? And focus on that, because you will find yourself feeling fulfilled and excited about life when you've got a purpose, a reason to show up in your life each day. And then if you're like that, inshallah, you will attract a similar kind of person into your life. And can you imagine what a beautiful marriage that will be if you've got two very purposeful people coming together, not needing each other because they're totally self-satisfied? How much more beautiful that will be as a marriage, because they will both just bring amazing things to that marriage. So just look at your own life first and make the most of your own life first, and then hopefully you'll attract an amazing similar soul into your life, and Allah will bless you with that soul, and you'll do amazing things together and have amazing children and amazing life, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for a beautiful perspective, Catherine. And I'm loving, honestly, the transparency. Now, I'm afraid we are kind of short in time, but I have a question someone has asked, and I feel like it would be amazing to answer this if we can just answer it very quickly. And that's, how do I raise my children being a revert Muslim?
Yes.
Very difficult question.
We've had these discussions in our support groups too. And I think that raising children, full stop, for all Muslims is, we need to understand the concept of tarbiyah. We need to actually understand that we're nurturing souls that are already pure and whole, that our job is to do our best to be of pure heart ourselves and guide them in a truthful, authentic, sincere way, and not to be harsh with them, because that's not going to help at all. And the Prophet ﷺ was never harsh with children. He was always very compassionate and calm and respectful towards them. So we take that example. But when it comes specifically to converts, I think before we even have children, establishing what our home culture will be, which is that if we've married into another culture, is working on what is our family culture, so that when the children come into the world, they come into something solid that you and your husband, or if it's a male convert, their wife, have set up. Build your nest ready for the for the eggs, right?
Build the nest, indeed. Thank you so much, Catherine, for appearing tonight. It's been an absolute honour, and again, I want to reiterate a huge thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Now, if anyone wants Catherine for any particular advice or dilemmas and wants to get contacted with her, we have tagged it on our social medias, and you can also find out more on her profile when you do navigate through there, and about her Back to Fitra Academy. So again, thank you so much, Catherine, and for sharing your personal experiences and being our guest tonight. Just to reiterate back, we are honoured that that Catherine has shared her personal experience and circumstances with us today. This is a subject we will revisit for sure, and if you are suffering any emotional distress or have been affected by today's programme, you can reach out to relevant organisations for confidential advice. Full details can be found on our website, BritishMuslim.tv/support. If you are in immediate danger, please always dial your national emergency line, and in the UK, that is 999. It's been an absolute honour, and I'm very grateful that British Muslim TV have provided a platform for us to continue to have these important discussions and push for increasing awareness on these underrepresented and taboo subjects. Remember, as always, you can be a part of our discussions every week. Just call us or WhatsApp us or get us in touch on social media. See you next time, and assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.